of high standards. Great. Let's share the screen. Great. So someone give me a thumbs up that they can see this successfully. Great. Yeah, welcome to this Nature Natters. So my name is Simon, and I am the Senior Project Officer for Nature Counts and our More Data for Nature project. I've also actually just finished a PhD at the University of Sheffield. So I've been in Sheffield now about 5 years. It's sort of city that you get here and then you get stuck. You don't really want to leave. So and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about our Nature Counts project, biology recording, why it's useful, what we do with records and things like that. Great. So let's cover the basics. What are biological records? So biological records are essentially, there's 4 key pieces of information attached to a biological record. So firstly, it's what is the organism or species that you've seen, and then secondly, of course, we've got where is it? So this could be, is it in a park? Is it in your garden? Is it a nature reserve? Another key piece of information is when did you see it? So this is important if we think about, species like insects, where they might not be around at some time of the year, or when you see them is quite useful because maybe they've emerged, maybe it's earlier than other years, so that's useful information. And then finally, you might think, why does it matter who recorded it? Well, actually, this is really important for biological recording, because if we've got a record for a particular species and we're like, oh, this seems interesting or unusual, it's kind of useful to be able to go back to the person who recorded it and query, oh, actually, where did you see it? We need to investigate this. This is quite an interesting sighting. So biological records are essentially someone has seen some wildlife somewhere at some time. And these are the 4 key pieces of information of a biological record. So for this butterfly example, what is it? It's all brown. Where is it? It's at Card Rocks. When was it? On the date, and who recorded it? And so Nature Counts is our sort of online recording system, but I thought it'd be nice to give you a bit of a context of where it came from and why we have it, what motivates it. So in 2018, we published the Sheffield State of Nature report. You may have read it, you may have been at the launch, maybe even been involved in it, and it was really quite a big project to see what we knew about the state of nature in Sheffield, so pulling data from all sorts of different sources. But actually, one of the key findings came out of it was we need better data. We've got data which is useful for some things, but there's other things we just don't really know about. And so as a result of that, we launched this project called Data for Nature in 2019, where we set up Nature Counts as our biological recording database. And then by the end of that project, we'd done a massive digitization effort. So we had a lot of biological records, but they were just sat on spreadsheets or they were sat in filing cabinets. And that's not really much use, because if we want to look at, okay, what species do we have at one of our nature reserves, it's a lot of work to then go through spreadsheets or filing cabinets. So we put them all into Nature Counts. So now we've got one database where we can access all our records. And at the end of that, we had a good 28,000 records and about 1,800 species. This then rolled onto the project we're doing at the moment called More Data for Nature. And this has got a couple of different angles. In terms of nature counts, sort of doing some improvements to it, and just sort of encouraging more people to use it and let people know about what it is and why it's useful. And so at the moment, I checked this morning, and we have 35,000 records, and we've increased our species count quite well. So now we're at 2,277 species, which is very nice. And we're looking to obviously continue to grow this and build the data we have, because it's so useful for understanding the state of nature in Sheffield. So maybe if we were to do another State of Nature report in 10 years' time, having got data, having got nature accounts for a resource, maybe our conclusion would be like, actually, our data is a lot better than it was, and so that'd be a really good outcome. So, what are records useful for? So, we've collected all this data. We've got lots of information about what species are where. But why is that useful, and what can we use it for? So, I guess the first and obviously the key thing is understand the biodiversity that we have at a reserve. So we can, with this database, we can then look at, say, Wyoming Brook, one of our nature reserves. We can build like a species list of species that we've seen here, and we can go, oh, okay, wow, we've got quite a lot of plant species, and oh, okay, our reserve is supporting quite a lot of bird species. Similarly, if we've done lots of recording at somewhere else, and we haven't got seen the biodiversity, then maybe that's, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to adapt our conservation work. So it all feeds into our evidence-based conservation work, whereas rather than just looking at a site and we're going, let's chop the trees down, we're actually going, okay, well, we know we've got these species in this site, and we've got this species in this site. So actually, if we've chopped the tree down, it will really help this species, but it might not benefit this one as much. And we can kind of weigh these things up, and our conservation work can have this sort of added level of evidence. Another thing records are really useful for in terms of climate change, we know that like springs are coming earlier, and species will be able to expand northwards. So that's quite interesting in tracking, when species occur outside their existing range. That's a really useful thing that records are useful for. And invasive species. So if we know an invasive species is somewhere, we can deal with it and we can manage it, and the council can work with it, or if it's on our reserve, we can deal with it. But if we don't know that, then how can we respond to that? And people might be walking past it every day and be like, oh no, there's an invasive species. But if without submitting the record somewhere, the authorities that need to deal with it, they can't, because they don't know where it is. And I forgot to get rid of that who bullet point. You can tell I made this PowerPoint quite quickly. So nature counts, it's also part of this sort of wider data flow ecosystem in itself. Although I won't go into too much detail. And of course, there are other places you can record records, and there's pros and cons for them. But we're sort of our system is nature counts. So if you submit a record to nature counts, it doesn't just sit on our database. We actually then we host our data with the Biological Record Centre, which is a national organisation that hosts a lot of records. They also host the records for the iRecord system, if you're familiar with that. So our data and iRecord's data sort of sit next to each other. They also manage a lot of the national monitoring schemes. So they host our data, and this means we can access what's called the iRecord Verify system. So someone who is an expert in a field, maybe they're really good at bees, they'll get sent our records that we've submitted, especially if they've got a picture with them. They can then verify and be like, yep, that's the right species. You've got a good species identification skill there. or I'm not quite so sure about that, but have you tried this species? So that's their role in it. The BRC also share our records to, or publish our records to the National Biodiversity Network Atlas. And this is a really useful resource. This is a resource anyone can access. If you're interested in seeing what records are available in your area, I would recommend search for the NBN Atlas. Just a big map. You can explore it and see what records are in your area. But some data won't have the exact locations, but it's good for getting good sort of feel for what sort of species are in the area. And we work very closely with the BRC and the NBN in order to make this all work. So if you submit a record with us, it doesn't just sit on a database. It goes beyond, and actually after the NBN Atlas, it also goes to something else called the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, which is a big global database. And actually, so our data goes even beyond the national scale. And if you're thinking, gosh, well, I see lots of wildlife everywhere, should I record it all? Should I only be recording the rare species? And actually, the message is basically everything is valuable. And I think people overestimate the amount that we know about our wildlife in the area. And actually, there's a lot of cases where a lot of species are quite under-recorded. So the sort of message we'll put across is everything is valuable, but it'll be quite a lot of effort to record everything you see. But maybe if you go out on a visit to your local park or a nature reserve, maybe you're writing down what species you see, and then you submit that list at the end of it to Nature Counts. Or maybe you see something really exceptional or rare, or sort of like, oh, I don't quite know what this is. Then maybe you could submit that. Or what I quite like to do is, if it's something I haven't seen before, I'll submit that as a record and kind of build up my sort of personal species list, see how many species I can get to, a bit like Pokemon, And also, if you see an invasive species, it's always worth recording. Great. So now this bit, I'm just going to give you a quick tour of a very quick tour of Nature Counts and show you how you can. So if you just go to our website, wildsheffield.com. Of course, there's lots of other fantastic content on here, but what you're here for is Nature Counts. So you can see, look for the mouse in the middle here, and if you click on this page, it takes you to this page. Gives you a bit of other information about Nature Counts, what it is, and a little video as well. Click the big green button here, add your sightings to the database, and it takes you to Nature Counts. So you can, if you think you're going to be recording more often, then I would recommend you make an account. If you go to log in and then you go to create a new account, you can see you can create an account and it will send you an email, and this is really useful for if you want to edit a record afterwards or manage them, or if I was saying building up your species list and see how many you can get. That's quite useful. So this, but maybe you're just a one-off. Maybe you just want to test it out. You don't need to log in and make an account to submit a record. So if you want to enter a casual record, so a casual record is just like one record of one place. Or you can enter a list of records. So this is like, you've done a species list. So if you go to click on enter a casual record, you can see you basically met with a big web form. And whilst it may look like, quite a big page, only some of this information is absolutely essential. So see the ones with the red stars, the asterisks, then that's the important information. There's other stuff which is useful for us, and if you've got the time, then do fit in. But it's really essential. I was talking about those core 4 pieces of information: what, who, when, and where. So you can just pop in your email here. This is the sort of who bit of your data. You know, if we need to verify a record, they can get in contact with you about that. If you want to select when the record was, you can add your name in here. The species bit, this is where you're entering what information, and you can just start typing either the scientific name or the common name, and you can see it brings up all these suggestions. I'm looking for the bird here, robin, and if I click on this, then that means I'm submitting a record of a robin. We've got a bit of extra information if you want it. So maybe you're not actually quite, you think it's likely, or maybe it's uncertain about your identification, but you can specify that. If you see like a big flock of geese and you've spent your while counting them, then maybe that's important information. So maybe you'd say there were lots of geese, but obviously robins wouldn't be that many. If it's a male or female, you can add that information here. If it's an adult or pre-adult. And actually, if someone helped you identify it, then it's also good to mention them in here. It kind of helps with the verification process. Adding photos. This is where you can add a photo. So you can either click add photos to add a photo here, or you can drag a photo in. So maybe obviously this I've selected robin, but this is just a picture of an oak species that. Obviously, I wouldn't put that. But that's how you add a photo. And then the location. So the simplest way is probably if you just want to search for a place on a map. So maybe it was in Crooks Valley Park, where I go on my lunch every day. So, and then you can find it. And then from there, you can specify where exactly it was. So maybe it was around here. And then it gives you this nice grid reference, so you know exactly where it's recorded. And then we've got another bit of extra information if you want to add information about the habitat, but again, that's not essential. And if there's any comment, this is quite useful for people on who do like our social media stuff about the records. If you give them a little bit of information about what it is, maybe it was doing something interesting, that kind of makes it easier for them to do something with it. So and then you simply press submit, and then bam, your record's in the database, and it will trundle along the system. It will be in the NBN Atlas, and it will be in and it can be used by people to understand the ecology of the area and help conservation work. There's also, if I go back to the home page, so that's, if you just see one species, you want to enter it. If you want to enter a list of records, then you can do this. Again, it's asking for the same piece of information. It probably won't let me go past them. There we go. So if you see, you can enter species names. Instead of it being in one long form, we're now just using a little table. Kind of makes it almost easier to see. So if we go to, I want to enter my robin again, then you can see I'm into the same information, just in a slightly different format. And then to add images, you press add images. Do that there. And then finally, you just go to the Where Was It tab. Obviously, I would, I'm just showing you quickly, but I would enter my full name in here. There we go. And then we're met with the same map here. And actually, you can do this on your phone. We don't have an app, but it's just a website, and you can open it on your web browser, Chrome or whatever. And if you click this little blue compass, it will try and find your location. Obviously, I'm on a computer, so it gets it wrong. But that's another way if you just want to pop in a quick record whilst you're out and about. That's one way of doing it. So that's essentially how to submit a record. As I say, if you're going to be doing it, you want to submit records, I would recommend you create an account. It kind of gives you a bit more in terms of exploring the records. So if I just log in as myself here, you'll get, under Explore, you get this thing called My Records, where it will put your records on a map, and then you can explore them and build filters. In terms of getting help, we've got help pages. If you click on either help at the top here or help at the bottom here, it takes you to this help page being put together. Lots of information about how to submit records, videos and things. So if you need any help, that's where you should go. You can let us know. And also if you want to share your sightings or when we get a bit of ID help, we've also put together a Facebook group, Wildlife Sightings. It was originally just for our volunteers on our Data for Nature project, but actually it's been quite useful as a sort of tool for people to get ID help. So we're sort of opening up to members and volunteers and things. So you click that link there, that'll take you to the Facebook group. And yeah, as you say, NBN Atlas. And I kind of want to show you this. Say you can explore records on GBIF, which is the global database. And then you can see some citations, which are scientific papers that have been published using our data. And this one's really fantastic here. This is like a big analysis of data from trees across the world, trying to synthesize tree biodiversity and understand patterns. And our data is in here. I mean, obviously, we're a very tiny bit in this little map, and it's obviously such an enormous analysis. But your records go beyond just sitting in a database. That they can do all sorts of things for science and ecology and conservation. So that's why we recommend you submit your records, because they're really useful information. And so just a reminder of where you can find it. So if you just go to the homepage of our Wildlife Trust, you can click on the mouse, the Nature Counts, and then click on this big green button, and that'll take you to our Nature Counts database. And I've lost my slides, but I did I feel now I'm happy to go and ask some questions if anyone going to coordinate this. Oh, I see this question in the chat.
We've got some questions in the chat, so
I didn't see the chat, sorry.
No, it's fine. I'll just read them out to you, and then if anybody wants to unmute after we've gone through these ones, then just unmute and you can ask Simon. But we've got one. What counts as Sheffield, and what about moorland just outside Sheffield? Do you want recordings from nature reserves, and what about gardens?
So yeah, recordings outside nature reserves are super useful. I mean, so our data are traditionally focused on our reserves because that's where we've been doing our survey. But recordings outside nature reserves, it all feeds into the national monitoring schemes. In terms of areas just outside Sheffield, just outside Sheffield and Rotherham area, this is a perfectly fine place to submit records. I mean, so our operational area of our trust does include a bit of the Peak District. So that's and as I say, because it all feeds into the NBN Atlas, if someone is looking for data in that area, which isn't us, then they will find it anyway because it's on the NBN Atlas. And gardens is also very useful. Gardens can support a massive range of biodiversity, as we know from us putting bird feeders out and hedgehogs and getting involved with No Mow May. Those sort of records are all really useful as well, because I think urban biodiversity is well, actually, so there was this conference for the natural form of biological recorders, where the theme was all about open recording and stressing how important that is. So I think it's certainly very valuable.
The next question is, iNaturalist has such an abundance of functionality. Why did you not choose that as your repository?
Hi, Jerry.
Hi.
So, so when we were weighing up the options for how we wanted to set this up, a couple of years ago, in terms of data flow getting from the recorder to like local environmental record centers, the NBN Atlas, that was a lot more. That link was a lot stronger with this sort of Nature Counts iRecord approach, and so that's what we went with. iRecord is a very good platform, and it's good at what it does. It has lots of good features, but in terms of with Nature Counts, we've actually got a bit more sort of control over how we set up the survey forms. We're using Nature Counts for our ecological monitoring on our reserves. So we're going out and doing surveys, which aren't just biological records. They're, recording maybe the behavior of the animals or the quantity or the sort of attributes about the environment as well. And so if we use Nature Counts for our surveys, we sort of get the biological records as well, and they feed in. So I think we're not saying, you must record with Nature Counts, choose whatever platform you want. And I think in terms of where you record, I think it's basically good to record on an online platform rather than, emailing someone or something like that, just because it means the data flows quicker. So iNaturalist is good in that sense, and iRecord and Nature Counts in that there's much less of a time lag.
Can I ask a question? If, theoretically speaking, if one was going to have a camera which records stuff, does it matter who/what records the image? As in, if you've got a human, the human can then go ahead and put it in. But yeah. We're talking more along the lines of AI and photo recognition. We're kind of, our work operates on people recording things. It's not really something we haven't really thought about that much. Agreed. The question that I was asking more was on the ethics of it. Because I'm always torn on this because I'm doing a master's in eco-economics. So on one side, you have you record it, recording is good. But on the other side, you say who verifies it, and you don't have any record of what it is then used for. So more on the what does the you didn't really go into where does the data go and all of this lot, all of that information. Where would I go to find that?
So, it's kind of interesting points, but it's not really, the future of AI and biological recording isn't something it's a bit beyond the scope of our project.
No, but I don't know anybody else who you'd go ahead and talk to ask this question about.
Yeah.
Can I?
Jerry's got his hand up, Simon? So yeah, fire away.
I think there's several things. One is that in some apps, and particularly iNaturalist, you can set your copyright level, so you can have ownership if you wish. So that gives you a chance to actually have total control over where it goes. Or you can say this is Creative Commons and release the data and say, I don't care how it's used. I've done my bit, and that's fine. So I think
this I understand.
Right. So that is one of the pluses of iNaturalist, because you can set 3 levels of copyright. You can have one complete release, you can have one complete control, and you can have a middle one where you allow some some usage. So that's really good. As regards the who records, etc., in iNaturalist, if you take a photograph, it will actually pick up details from that photograph and use those. So it sorts out your location and your date from when you took
so very much like PlantNet, which is being run by the French Biological Society.
But the problem with PlantNet is it's just plants. So if I then see a bird, I've got to go elsewhere to do it. So,
but the thing was that I think that the French universities went ahead and created it, and they said, here you go, well, you know, we've got lots of plants, we've got phones, why don't we take pictures? And then I think it all spiraled and then said, well, hang on a minute, maybe we could then go ahead and with this data, drive political will, which then created more oomph for things such as rewilding Europe, which now has being given more and more money from the G7, who said, hey, yeah, you know, biodiversity matters, which comes back to...
We just bring it back to, I mean, this is interesting,
I was going to say,
but we've got a couple of other questions that
can I just
to get
back to my comment about iNaturalist, please? Because one of the things it's got is recognition software that is so good. And I think for spreading that out for beginners, it's a really useful way of helping out identification skills. I mean, that's one. And the other thing is you can go to a site and you can see all the records that are there before you go. So you get an idea of what you might see as well.
Could you send me your email in the chat if that would be possible?
I will do.
Yeah, I think you two have an interesting conversation ahead of you. I think we've got some other questions that we get to get through, if that's all right. But yeah, in fact, there's obviously biological recording is quite an interesting sphere because you're generating data, and you know, if we're thinking about things like personal data, you know, there's obviously implications of that, like where does biological recording sit within that? But let's get to some other questions. Okay, so Rebecca, do you want to?
Yes, that's really interesting debate there. So thank you for that. But just to give everyone else the opportunity, we'll go on to another question now. So what about species where we don't know if they're specially protected? Where can we find out which should be sensitive, i.e. raptors, grouse shooting on moors? Like, how do you know which ones are sensitive and which are not?
Yeah, so we've got a species list within Nature Counts where if you try and submit a record for any bird of prey, then it will automatically mark it as sensitive, because as we are aware, birds of prey and raptor persecution is an issue. And we base that off the sensitive species list that the National Biodiversity Network use. So any data they share will also be the record. If it's marked as sensitive, it will be sort of it won't give the exact location of it on the basis that it is a sensitive record. But if you don't know if they're sensitive, if they're protected, then it will either automatically mark it as sensitive and you won't have to worry about it, or if you are concerned, like, or even if it's in a location which is sensitive rather than the species, you can mark it as a sensitive record.
Okay, the next question is, what is the connectivity with other national databases, e.g. the BTO bird track, where many people will submit bird records?
Well, with the BTO, so the BTO, I think a lot of their data is on the NBN Atlas. So the NBN Atlas sort of is kind of moving towards being this sort of central repository. And I see you've also put a question about linking iNaturalist and iRecord. I think the idea of moving forward now is to sort of link iNaturalist at an NBN level, the National Biodiversity Network. So the NBN have become like the iNaturalist UK sort of coordinator. So bird track and the BTO data, I would assume that they can access, you know, our data through the BRC, but yeah, so there are some links. They probably could be stronger, and I think as people develop over time, I'm sure they'll get it. I see you got your hand up, Sean, if you want to speak to any of this.
I was just going to say, Simon, that I know that the Sheffield Bird Study Group get a download from BirdTrack for their records, so you could probably do the same if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. If, like you say, BirdTrack links to the BRC and the National Biodiversity Network, it may link at that level anyway. But I just wondered if you wanted them in Sheffield, you could probably get a download and upload it into the database if you wanted to.
Well, yeah, we're trying to avoid sort of, you know, copying data into our database because it just sort of creates multiple copies, and trying to work towards, you know, all the data feeding to a common level like the NBN Atlas, and then we use the data from there. Because really we should be like looking after our data and our data only. So yeah, I think we could be more linked up, and as these things develop and the data flows sort of mature and get more accessible, I think it's stuff we have to be aware of. But yeah, that's useful. Thanks.
Is there an age limit? Can under 18s submit records?
Yeah, they can. I don't think there's any reason for any age limit. I mean, of course, it does collect a bit of personal information in terms of just your email and name, but you know, you don't have to give your address. You don't have to give any other personal information with regards to that. So no, you can certainly upload records, and yeah, there's. I think in biological recording, there's a little bit of a concern that maybe, you know, a lot of the core established biological recorders are maybe a bit older, so it's really good to get younger people involved as well.
Fab. I think that's the end of the questions in the chat box. So if anyone else has any questions, then go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can ask them directly to Simon.
We could go back to data and ethics.
We've got a few other questions, I think. So we've got some people. So you want to go for it, Phil?
A question about verification. If we put a record in that we're not sure, who verifies it? One of the reasons I'm asking this is because we did quite a lot of work for Owlthorpe where the land was lost for housing. And one of the things that the homes people, the builders, said was that the records that a lot of people put in were worthless because they were just a bunch of amateurs putting in their records. But our argument was everything was put through things like our nature counts and yourselves. So therefore, is there any verification you can say these are official records that have been verified by people who know what they're talking about, as against people like myself who just say I've seen this and I think that's what it was, if that makes
sense. Yeah, it depends how widely, you know, recognized. In terms of us, if something's been verified by iRecord, and if you log into your account and then you look at your records, you can see little green ticks that appear next to it that have been verified by like the county recorders for a particular area. In terms of how we treat them, then that gives us verification. I mean, in terms of any sort of official standing, and unfortunately, I don't know if maybe they didn't appreciate, you know, that because it's been verified by someone on iRecord. So, sorry, answering Phil's question. So, yeah, and when they appear on NBN Atlas, like there's a verified status. So, yeah, I think in terms of how we treat them, you know, if something's been verified by our record, then we treat it with extra attention. It's just whether that translates to how external people that we don't have any control over how they treat it. If that makes sense.
Okay.
How would you get them to be verified?
Just jumps in.
So, well, I'll answer quickly, and we've got some other people with hands up. But it goes through a system called iRecord-Verify, where people who are recognized experts in that particular taxonomic group or that particular local area, and they say, yes, this is this. And if obviously it needs a picture to be attached to be verified, but that's how we get it.
Can I, in terms of pictures, can I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Can you upload photos if you're not sure? We're neither trained biologists nor trained conservationists, so that we see a lot of animals where we're not quite sure, but we have a rough idea. Can you upload photos if you're not sure about what species you're seeing?
Yeah, so you definitely can. And I mean, so there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You could, as I pointed towards, we've got like a Facebook group if you want a bit support, or you can tweet us or post it on our Facebook page for the Wildlife Trust if you need a bit of help for identification. But then you still can upload, and you know where I was putting in Robin for the exact species, you can just put in like plant or fungi, and then you can leave it at that, and then maybe you can get through the books and you've got a wildlife ID book, and maybe you identify it later. And if you've made an account, you can log into your records and you can update it. Yeah. But don't be put off if you just because you're not quite sure what it is yet. It's still kind of useful.
Any more questions?
One more question. What if you hear something but not see it? We heard a cuckoo, but we didn't see it.
So in that case, I mean, it depends. So Nature Counts currently isn't set up for recording audio. I know Jerry would add that iNaturalist is, but you can still add a record without a picture, and you can just put in the comments heard, because if someone looks at a record and says cuckoo and someone has said a comment saying they heard it, it's quite an iconic sound. So like people would recognize that they probably have seen a cuckoo. They're not making it up. Got another hand from Sean, yeah?
I was just going to say, Simon, that if you go bird watching, the majority of records that you'll submit will be audio records. If you're walking through woodland, you won't see very many birds. And I think, it's an encounter with the species, no matter how you see it or hear it or sense it, that's important. If you hear a bird singing in that particular place, it's there. With the cuckoo, it can often be a long way off, so you have to be careful where you record it. But I think audio, encounters are just as valid as visual ones. Yeah,
and records come in all shapes and sizes. You've got evidence, or like you can run hedgehog tunnels where you have a bit of ink and paper, and you can kind of see footprints, and that's a record because that is evidence of the organism was there, and if you know when it was there, and that fulfills your 4 criteria. What was it? Where was it? When was it? And who recorded it? So records comes in all shapes and sizes, and audio records, I mean, for Nature Counts, you just have to submit the list of records. We got one from Peter, yeah? Sorry, he's still muted, I think.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a founder member of Woodhouse Washland Nature Reserve, way back in the 90s. Are you looking for records from the nature reserves or across the city or anywhere?
Basically, anywhere. I mean, our database is kind of, in terms of what data we have at the moment, it is very much focused on our reserve, because that's where our staff have been out and that's where our volunteers go out. But yeah, we're trying to widen it up, and if you want to submit records from your garden or across the Sheffield area or the Rotherham area, then that's really useful. I mean, it's kind of especially useful in terms of records from our reserves, because obviously our reserve managers can then act on that, whereas a record in someone's garden, we can't incorporate that into our management plan, but it kind of feeds into our broader understanding of it.
Now, I'm full-time carer for a a wife with Alzheimer's dementia, so it's very limited now.
Yeah.
I get about a mile or so around the back of where I live. This includes the latest of the frog-life ponds. But visits to nature reserves are going to be few and far between. I just wondered if it covered everywhere. I've had a wildlife pond in the garden that's got newts have been breeding for 30 years, things like that. But it's very limited because she can't be left. So that's why I was asking if it was general gardens and areas or if it's specifically nature reserves.
No, it's generally any records from the Sheffield and Rotherham area, yeah,
Right.
and beyond the cities as well.
Yeah. Right, cheers.
Was there one more question?
Well, I'm going to have to leave because the carer who helps me for half an hour at dinner time's just arrived. So, well, thanks very much.
All right,
Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, Peter. Bye. So I think that might be it. Oh, is there another question? Sorry.
One more about, I just wanted to ask about, are we talking about all sorts of wildlife, including insects or, you know, anything that flies or runs or walks or crawls?
Yeah. We have slime molds in the database. We have insects. We've got
leafcutter bees.
Yeah, we've got
mining bees.
Because so you can, the species I showed you where I just put in a robin, like it's got the full UK species inventory, so you can put any.
Okay. Thank you.
In there. More the better. Yeah. I've also can you see? So I'm also doing a talk next week with the Field Studies Council, who are amazing people, do lots of great talks, but it's just a 1 hour session about a bit more about how biological records work for conservation, you know, what are they useful for, what are they, what are the challenges that we face, kind of thinking about the, what can we use them and what do we need to do in the future, and how to make sure the records you're submitting are most valuable for conservation. So I'll drop a link to that in chat.
That's great. Thank you so much, Simon. We've just got one more message in the chat that's just popped up. Oh, that's you, Simon. One just saying that Japanese knotweed had been reported to Sheffield City Council, but nothing's been done so far.
I think in this, I mean, it's difficult because they're only finite resource, and Japanese knotweed is obviously a very expensive thing to deal with. So hopefully hopefully they'll get around to it. But if in doubt, report it again. The City Council will be dealing with that site. But I mean, thanks for reporting it anyway.
Yeah, somebody asked how long it's been outstanding. Well, I first noticed it in April last year.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's on the bank of the Sheaf down at Broadfield, I think it should get some urgent attention, but nothing has been done, I'm afraid, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of thing, the fact that it just shows the value of the record. The fact that you submitted a record, April last, or you told them April last year, means now you can say it has been there a year, and you've got evidence for having submitted it over a year ago. So, yeah, I think just keep stressing it and keep.
My impression was, it looked a pretty, what's the word? A pretty big bunch. So I would have thought it would have been there more than that time. Anyway, yeah. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to Simon. It's been an insightful talk, and I hope you've all learned something from it, and you can go and submit your records to Nature Counts now. And if you want any more information, then don't hesitate to get in touch. look at the help sites on our website. And yeah, we're always here for anything membership. Then feel free to email me whenever, and email Simon about anything Nature Counts if in doubt, and join the Facebook group. So thank you everyone again, and hopefully see you soon. Have a lovely weekend. Bye everyone.
Bye. Thanks for coming.